Hey everybody, it's your girl Coach Christal, and welcome to Wisdom Wednesday, a weekly vlog where we get to talk to some amazing people, not only people that I think are encouraging, but people I think we can have candid conversations with that allow you to find the next tangible step in your growth process. Now, if you're just joining us for the first time, I want to welcome you to the Steps and Stages platform with our mantra that we start each and every talk or session with, and it just says that a lot of things happen before this. And I guarantee a lot of things are going to happen after this, but I promise to be here with you now. Please be here with me now. And if you're just joining us, you may not have heard that on May 27th, we're going to have Vision Camp virtual. We've been on Vision Camp live tours. And if you haven't been able to get in the building, we're going to come directly to you, into your screen, into your living room for a 3-hour live teaching on how to create a vision that becomes the blueprint of a life you actually love living. So on May 27th from noon to 3 p.m., we'll drop a link below this video. But before we get too far into that, let's start by really being clear why we're here tonight. We're here tonight to talk to an amazing person, Andi Lloyd, who I have been privileged enough to know in a professional way, and now I would call a friend. I admire this person, not because of just what they've done in the world in terms of their profession, but because of their authenticity. And we know that a vision requires a certain level of vulnerability to bring to fruition. And that vulnerability, coupled with strength, actually leads to the authenticity of living a life you truly love. So please help me welcome Andi Lloyd. Andi, welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you.
No, it's so good to be here with you. Listen, I just want you to be able to introduce yourself to our platform in the way that you would like to be known. So tell us in your own words who you are.
I'm Andi Lloyd, and I am currently a pastor in Maine in the United Church of Christ. I know Christal from chapter 1, I suppose. I was a professor of biology at Middlebury College, and then an administrator, vice president for academic affairs and dean of the faculty. And so I had the great pleasure of working with Christal in that role. And I'm just so happy to be back with you.
It's so wonderful to be here with you. I just want to say that I know that sometimes we graze over titles and we breeze through them, but people actually don't actually know what the work is behind that, right? So going from being a classroom professor into the administration of any institution, right, takes a level of humanity, humility, and tenacity. So can you just tell us a little bit about that first transition that you just illustrated, and like what about that changed how you saw yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that transition was key. I didn't realize it at the time, but I went into a conversation with the then president of the college, telling my then husband that there was no way I was going to say yes to a full-time administrative position. I was like, no way, no how. And I came out like 20 minutes later and I was like, I said yes. And I think, so there's a little bit of just a leap of faith, I suppose, for me. But it came at a moment when I didn't know what I wanted the next thing to be in my academic career. Yeah. I was a research scientist. I was a teacher. I was loving the teaching. I didn't know what the next research thing was. And I feel like in hindsight, the turning point for me was having the wisdom somehow to just say, I don't know. And so I'm going to do something radically different.
Yeah.
Instead of just going on to something that my heart isn't in. And administration was, it was a really steep learning curve because you kind of just get tossed into it. Mm-hmm. And I did a lot of learning, made a lot of mistakes, but discovered along the way that there were things about it that I loved that I had no idea I'd love. I loved working with people, it turns out. And I just loved it. Even when people were being complicated and challenging, there's such a tenderness to humanity. And I discovered that as an administrator, which I never would have guessed. I never would have guessed that would have been my takeaway from life as a college administrator, but it was. Yeah. So in a way, it led into ministry in a really interesting way.
That's amazing, right? Because actually what I hear you saying in the background is that I was a researcher. I was used to coming up with really big questions. And when I didn't have a question I believed in, I did something different.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're often talking on this platform about how the quality of your questions determine the quality of your life.
Yep.
And so in this research process, we're often also talking about getting more data. And sometimes when you feel stuck, you just do the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this next stage of your life, is this the next question? So going from the vice president of a liberal arts institution to now being a minister, where was the question there?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think maybe there's more than one question there. So the sort of the in a nutshell version of how that happened, that too was like, this is apparently the story of my life, that the big things happen not because I planned them, but because I make some other decision that ends up opening up a path I didn't know was there.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So
I hope everybody heard that, right? Like, you don't have to know.
Exactly. The path will unfold. So sometime around I guess it was 2017. So I'd been an administrator. It was like my 5th year of being an administrator, I think. I had spent my whole life running from faith. I had this deep belief in God and didn't know what to do with it, and hung out in really secular circles, and was afraid of church. And so just spent a lot of time in denial about that part of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And eventually that just got too loud, and I had to follow it. And so the question was, what will happen if I admit to the faith that I have, if I do this thing that's true to who I really am? Mm-hmm. And so I went to church in November of 2017, and it was this whole life cracked open, like, this is where I'm supposed to be, in this building. And like, it started out as like, I don't want to leave church. That was the best I could articulate what was happening to me, was I want to be in this building all the time. Yeah. And after a few months, I was able to articulate this feeling of being called into ministry, which was an answer to the question I didn't know I was asking, which was, where is God trying to lead me? Where is this yearning in my heart for faith leading me? What's been really amazing about it is that I've come back around and realized, I mean, there was a long time when I felt like I'd been like teleported into this entirely different path. Here I was, a biologist, then an administrator, and all of a sudden I'm like in divinity school and a pastor. And the farther I go down this path, the more I see the continuity, the things that travel with me, which is pretty cool. That part is really fulfilling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting, right? Because I often think about, well, first of all, let me just admit, something that's on my heart. Let me repent. I would see you and you would post and you say, I'm in divinity school, and I'll be deeply jealous. I'm like, what am I doing? No, I want to be there too. And I was like, what is it?
What was that about?
Yeah, exactly. Because everybody knows, like, secretly I'm like, back here just moving the magic around, playing with, playing matchmaker with God. You have a vision in your mind. I'm just like trying to get you closer to it. That's all I'm doing, right? I'm just kind of the conduit here. The other thing here is that this idea of faith, I think, is something that many people wrestle with because it's intangible. Yeah. Right? Coming from a science background, Andi, like, how did you wrestle with, I can prove it, but I can feel it?
Yeah, that was the wrestling match, right? But in a way, I think that was the wrestling match, but not in the way that I expected, because the science that I did, I was a forest ecologist. I studied climate change. It was all about measuring. Like, I was on my knees wrapping measuring tapes around trees, super tangible. And yet the questions I was trying to answer were big, and there was a lot of imagination that was required to ask the question and to answer it. So there's an imaginative part of the scientific enterprise that I don't think we necessarily talk a lot about, but was certainly there. And so in that sense, I've been surprised at how the science part of my brain and the way I learned to look at a forest and at a landscape is still useful when I'm thinking about God and faith. And I find a lot of inspiration out there in the woods that I used to study.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it was an easier transition. I think the harder part about the two words you just used, feel, and I can't remember what was the other word, prove. No. Yeah. Is that you know that academia is not a place that necessarily nourishes vulnerability, right?
No,
No, I know.
no.
Shocking. Shocking. So, and I come from a family where vulnerability was not that was not like one of the top skill sets that we learned.
Mhm.
So, and I remember, I'll tell you this. So I was early on in this conversation, I was sitting down with my pastor, Andy Benson.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I can't remember how he put it, but he was like, look, you're going to have to work on vulnerability. And I was like, no, I'm so good at vulnerability. I said, if I'm happy about something, everybody knows it. And he looks at me and he goes, do you know what vulnerability is? I was like, okay, maybe not. Maybe I should look it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. So learning to feel has been part of the process for me. Learning to feel, learning to talk about feelings, learning to be vulnerable, deeply vulnerable.
Yeah.
Every day. Whew. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the part that's been hard.
Yeah, and I love this because I mean, I think spiritually, you and I think, are connected on a certain level. But then when I listen to you, I'm really just looking at the opposite side of the funnel, right? Like things go in, things come out in different ways. So people assume that artists are all about imagination and there's no structure,
Right.
which is the exact opposite as well. Like people don't wake up inspired every day.
Right.
You gotta like know how to structure the magic. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that the actual creative process is built on how vulnerable can you be?
Yeah.
How much can you actually bring out, transform, and share with other people?
Right. Right.
So in this new role, right, you are now not only having to practice vulnerability, but I'm assuming in leading a congregation, you're having to, absorb other people's vulnerability.
Yeah.
How is that now coming? How's that reciprocal action now working for you?
That's one of the things I love about the job. And that's one of the things that I realized in administrative work and my role as dean of the faculty. One of the light bulb moments for me was realizing how much I loved those moments when I was one-on-one talking to somebody in a moment of crisis or a hard moment or a challenge, and holding that space to just be with somebody while they're feeling stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Was really powerful. And I realized how holy it felt to me, even in an academic context, and how grateful I was to be trusted. And so that part of it, it's been really clear to me from the beginning that was a part of what I felt called to do as a pastor. What I'm grateful for in professional formation and in training is learning how to have boundaries, how to hold people's stuff and recognize that we don't have a reciprocal relationship. I'm there to care for them and not vice versa. And to learn how to be vulnerable and open while also holding professional boundaries so that they can give me their stuff and I'm not giving them my stuff in return.
Yeah.
And learning, I think the hardest thing for me about all that is learning that my job is almost never to fix. And I love to fix. Fixing is so much fun and it's so rewarding. And there's very little fixing in the life of a pastor. It's like it's bearing witness and it's holding space and it's being with people and holding a hand and saying a prayer and handing them a Kleenex. And it's not fixing. And learning that there's value in simply being a pair of ears and an open heart.
Yeah. I tell my clients all the time, and we say it publicly in some of the ways that we speak about this work of vision coaching, but like, I'm not a guru, I'm a guide.
Yeah.
And as long as you have a good guide, you can probably go just about anywhere and enjoy it, even when it's raining or, you don't like it or it's not comfortable or you don't speak the language, all the things, right?
Yeah.
As long as the guide is there. And so I think about this a lot in terms of, I think what happens in many arenas of transformation, because they can take place anywhere. It could be the family, it could be the church, it could be an environment, an intentional community. When we think about these intersections of transformation where one life collides with another, and you do hold that space in a very kind of professional way, when you talk about fixing, part of it is also having the discipline to recognize that the person in front of you who may feel in need of your support is ultimately not broken.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's a real mind shift for the people who are in need and for the people who are offering support.
Yeah.
Right? Because that way that you, especially from a spiritual lens, the way that we look at original being perfect from the beginning and losing that, trying to regain it by the end, right, is that whole process of transformation. So, how have you been able to shape your, I guess your perspective, Andi, on people that we may be in a broken system, we may be in broken families, but we're not broken individuals?
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think that's a really important distinction, that those moments when we feel broken are often because the circumstances we're in are broken. And I think it comes down to being able to see the tender heart that is in the center of everyone. And to recognize that when people are coming to me, and I felt this especially as an administrator, because I get a lot less, people rarely come at me with anger as a pastor in the way that they would as an administrator, but just once in a while. But what I came to understand was, what I came to see was that a lot of those really hard interactions were motivated by fear, that people were deeply afraid of something. And that tenderness that I would see in those moments was really profound. And I felt like, and I continue to feel like, that's what's at the heart of each of us, is this tender beating heart that wants to be loved and wants to be able to live into the fullness of ourselves and feel stymied in some way. And sometimes it's as simple as trying to help people see that. Just like there are days when I feel like and there are a lot of them, when I feel like our ability to have compassion for ourselves and to be generous with ourselves and to give ourselves grace is we all need that. We all need that.
I agree. Right. And, one of the things that we talk about in our practice is that every kind of conflict or negative interaction with another person is somehow an unskillful request for love.
Yeah, exactly. That is so well said. Yes.
And everyone doesn't have the skill to ask for what they need.
Yeah.
So they might come in guns blazing, yelling, trying to get your attention so that they feel seen and heard, because we're all at the core trying to be seen and heard, because that is the essence of like the way and the will of hope, right? Like if I can get you to see me, then there might be a possibility we can find a solution. But if you can't see me, I can't really be honest and vulnerable with you. Right? My favorite example of this is like the 2-year-old who falls out in the grocery store over the candy bar. Right.
Yeah.
This is an unskillful request for love. Like, you don't love me enough to buy me a candy bar? Like, like it's the full-on tantrum meltdown into the world because they don't feel loved in that moment.
Right. They don't understand how somebody else could have a different desire than they do.
Exactly. And so the person that loves them, says they love them so much every day, can't get them a freaking candy bar.
Right. It makes no sense.
This freaking car is full of vegetables and you can't afford a candy bar. Right?
Exactly. Right.
I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning, Andi, because I've really been thinking, I've been really listening to the author of this. I don't know if it's a fairly new book. It's called Be Your Future Self Now. Right. And one of the 7 trappings that he lists is falling victim to your environment. Right. And so I want to go back to something you said earlier, because in this kind of emergence of your faith, this kind of voice that you couldn't keep quiet on the inside, you were also surrounded by, people who think faith is ephemeral, or people who, think beliefs can be measured by how good of a person they are.
Yeah.
Right. And so how did that keep your faith or your intuition, or that what we call the still small voice, from like really screaming out?
Yeah. So for so many years, for most of my adult life, I tried to deny that yearning towards faith because I was afraid of what people would think. I was afraid of losing relationships, which, was not a completely misplaced fear.
Yeah.
Not every relationship survived that change in my life.
Yeah.
And I was afraid of that. It was also fear of the unknown. I had this yearning towards God in my own heart that I couldn't really put words to, and I didn't know anybody else who felt that way. And so I had no model for what to do about this, which, looking back now, I feel really tenderly towards past me for all of her fear and not knowing. And but it was letting that quiet voice be made even quieter by the voice of fear, the voice of uncertainty, a voice that didn't want, by all the things that made me not want to be vulnerable, right? It comes back to this. I don't want to admit, like, walking into church was terrifying for me because I don't know the rules inside. And what if I do the wrong thing and I stand up when I'm supposed to sit down, and like, what's going to happen?
Right. Yeah. No, but that's true. I mean, that's true. That's a human condition, right? Yeah. Like, how do I enter the new boardroom, the new classroom, the new meeting? Right?
I won't know the rules.
Exactly. Yeah. And when we don't know the rules, or we don't know the outcome before we start, fear has a lot of runway to build us up into this false narrative, right?
Yep.
Another thing we say here all the time, and there might be some clients watching, and they're gonna already know, right? But we talk about this groove in the record of the paradigm that just keeps telling you the same story over and over, right? And then we talk about how the paradigm will kill your intuition, if it gets to stay alive. Right. So it's, that kind of constant everyday squelching it down, pushing it down is just another level of suffocation. Yeah. And then we often refer to that, the Gospel of Thomas in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it's like, if you bring the thing forth that is within you, it will save you. But if you don't bring that thing forth, it will kill you.
Yeah.
Because it just keeps eating at you.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna I like that, the metaphor of the groove in the record. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is that I made this decision to follow this path into ministry without having any idea what I was doing, really. I just knew it felt right, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I think a lot about something pushed the arm of that record player over into this other groove. I had no idea what was in that groove. And I think if I had known, I might have been too afraid to make that change. But here I am, and it's all awesome. But there are those moments of I think transformation can have these phases where it's gradual, and then phases where something happens really suddenly. And there's tremendous grace in those moments of sudden change, because I think we sometimes get pushed past some obstacle into a place we didn't know we were brave enough to be. But it turns out we are.
Right. And if we had the understanding that there was going to be the obstacle, we may not have gone that far ever.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's so we talk a lot of, when you try to figure out how this is all going to happen, you'll stay stuck in the same spot for years.
Yep.
Right. Until you get out there and just start pushing and getting some data. That's the real work. The pursuit is the real work. Right?
Nice. Yes.
So when we get to Andi, Act 2, Andi Lloyd 2.0, what do we know now that we didn't know before? And what do we think we want to know in the future?
What do I know about Andi, about me?
Mm-hmm. Or life in general, anything.
Life in general. Oh, I love that question. I think there's a related answer to what I know about myself and what I know about life and the world. And I think the word that's on my heart is trust. That I have learned, and I've had to learn in the journey of the past few years, to trust myself, to trust God, and to trust the people in my life. So I uprooted myself from Middlebury, Vermont, where I'd lived for 25 years, a place like I really thought I would live out my life there. Like I was planting trees in my garden, and I was doing all the things you do when you're going to live somewhere forever.
Yeah.
And I have my dearest friends are there. Two of my three kids are still in the area. Like that place was home, and I uprooted myself, and it's been terrifying at times, but it's been about trust and trusting that the relationships that sustained me then, it turns out they are continuing to sustain me. That my sense of what home is has simply gotten bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been this experience of trust. And I would not have said before I did this, I think I would have told you that I'm a really trusting person. And I think that was true.
You also would have told us you were super vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I was super good at vulnerability. Right. So this is like, right. You're getting at the the complexities.
Yeah.
But I think that my sense of trust in people and in the world has deepened. And there's something tremendously freeing about that.
Yeah.
The word in my mind in terms of of what's next, of what's emerging in me, the word is integration. And that, for me, it's really about integrating these different, like Act 1 and Act 2. There's an integration of Act 1 and Act 2 that needs to happen. I think part of what happens when you grow up with a paradigm of invulnerability is that I became very internally compartmentalized. Certain feelings are over there behind that locked door, and we don't ever go there. And then there's the other there's been work for me over the years of breaking down that internal compartmentalization.
Yeah.
And that's part of the integrity too. So there's sort of the inner emotional, spiritual work of integration. And then there's the work of figuring out what from Act 1 carries forward, how the first part of my life continues to inform the second part, recognizing the gifts that are coming out of Chapter 1 into Chapter 2, learning to tell that story as a single whole story, I think.
Yeah. There's two things I want to jump back to. One, I think you're making a really important distinction between trust and safety.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think I just want people to hear that. Like, you could be in an environment that feels safe, but it doesn't mean you trust yourself to grow. Right. Or that you trust the people around you to allow you to grow or to see you fully. Right. That's that vulnerability piece. And then I've been reading this book, The Future You Now, and he's talking about how sometimes if we don't have something to hope for that pulls us forward into this vision, it's because we haven't become proud of our past yet.
Yeah.
Right. So this other thing that you're talking about integration is like, oh yeah, I know exactly why all that happened because now I'm here. Right. Rather than being stuck in that, why did this happen to me? You'll never get to the next stage. Right. Because that kind of myopic thinking of this is happening to me, only me. I can't get out of this. There's no power there that's pulling or drawing on the power within. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, Andi, question of the season. We're asking all our guests the same question. We do this season. This season, our question is coming from a Don DeLillo quote that basically says that the family is the cradle of the world's misinformation. So we're going to ask each of our guests, your turn tonight, what is a piece of misinformation that you got in your family that you had to either undo, untangle, or that kind of led you away from your internal compass?
Yeah, there's so many choices. I say that with all love for my family. I think that probably the one that I have worked hardest to unlearn, it's related to the question of vulnerability, but learning that it's important to be fine all the time. Like,
Yeah.
I'm fine is the answer to the question of how are you, irrespective of how you are. And that to be anything but fine is to be needy.
Mm.
And if you're needy, who's going to want to hang out with you, really? Like, there's a really destructive narrative there in the need to be fine all the time. And it's taken me 56 years to start to untangle that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think in all of this, we're also understanding, or I think we also have a mutual respect for practice.
For what?
Practice.
Practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like just the notion that I can say that there's something different, or I want something different.
Yep.
I can try it. I can practice without keeping myself bound to some type of false perfection, which is really just another level of fear.
Exactly.
And then keep ourselves held back. I think one of the ways that we continue the misinformation, right, especially as mothers, is to teach them, right? And so I know you're a mother.
Yep.
And so as you're kind of unlearning the paradigms that kind of misinformed you, how are you now making sure that those haven't been layered somewhere in the mothering that you did before?
And I'm sure they have been layered. Let's be super clear. So I somehow gave birth to this child who was born with more emotional intelligence than I had. Like, at age 8, he had some emotional intelligence to him. And so I think I did layer that stuff on him. And I think as I've been working through it myself, I've tried to bring him into conversation. And there are moments when he has held me accountable, which I really appreciate. So, that's been part of it, is trying to figure out how to do things differently in my family. And what's interesting is that my siblings and I have this conversation too about, at our generation in our family, how can we navigate our relationships differently than maybe we learned to do growing up. So, but it's a it'll be a multi-generational process.
I think it has to be. I mean,
it has to be.
The way we met, like working in academia, right? We know that it takes 4 years for any seed to even get planted for change, right? It's a cyclical process. So it's a generational process.
Yeah.
Andi, I appreciate this conversation so much, because I think what you're also illuminating for people is that the sacrificing the sense of your own question for a false sense of success is the catalyst for many people's change. And so obviously in Act 1, you were enormously successful by anybody's measure or a stretch of the imagination. And being able to move from that into a place that felt like authentic success rather than just looked like it, I believe is hugely courageous, right? And so, I mean, as we kind of wrap up tonight, how do you define success for yourself now?
Yeah. I define it as being true to my own heart. And I define it as, part of being true to my own heart is being true to my faith, is a big part of that. But I also define success in terms of the impact I have on other people. At the end of the day, can I say that I did some good? Yeah. That's what I want, really.
Yeah. Well, I will say, in my time of knowing you, in my transition of also kind of being a celebrated visitor, or someone who was doing a little bit of being a little outside the norm of our community, right? I believe that your space and time that we shared obviously impacted my life. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I want to also let people know that you and Andi have a new book out.
We do.
It's about the book.
We have a book called Letters from the Ecotone. I don't know if that'll be readable or not. It's a series of letters we wrote back and forth during the pandemic about climate change, ecology, theology. Talk about integration. This has been a huge part of my work of integrating Act 1 and Act 2 was writing to him about climate change as an ecologist and as an emerging pastor. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Andi.
Thank you so much. It's been such a joy.
Such a joy. Ladies, gentlemen, non-binary human beings, people on the verge of greatness. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom Wednesdays. If you don't have your ticket to Vision Camp Virtual, we'll drop a link to that in the chat. We'll also drop a link to Andi's new book, and make sure that you're here next week when we have another amazing guest to check in about not only the next step, but the next stage of life as we know it. We'll see you soon. Have a good night.